and brotherhood. Now, Father was ordained a Catholic priest some time ago, maybe before one or two people here were born. So 1997. And he is a Franciscan friar. He's known for his pastoral leadership, teaching, and service. According to my research, he holds degrees in religious studies, pastoral ministry, human resources, and has a PhD in ministry. So he is the priest serving here at St. Francis of Assisi Catholic Church in Stratford. So please can we give a warm welcome to Father Ruth.
All right. Thank you, Michael, for that quick introduction. Sometimes I'm afraid to be introduced because it builds up a little expectations, no, from the people listening from you. So I will try to speak slowly because of my accent. That's a Filipino English, so it's better that I speak slowly. And I understand that I only have 45 minutes to share. So I'm very conscious about time management, but I will try to make it at least straightforward because the topic really would need a long time for discussion and even for reflection. But let me begin sharing with you my Asian culture and background. Let us begin our session this evening by inviting you a simple exercise. Okay? I want you to sit down, relax. Okay? And I invite you to close your eyes. And as you close your eyes, I want you to go back to a particular moment in your life when you have done wrong, when you committed mistake, when you were at fault. But despite those human limitations, weaknesses, you will also experience being forgiven. And I want you to go back to that moment. What was your feeling when you were forgiven? What made of you as a person that moment? You were forgiven for the wrongdoing that you have done. And again, I would like to invite you to go back a little in your life history when you were hurt, when you were angry, when you were betrayed by someone you love most, somebody who is very important in your life, whom you trusted, but have done something life-changing, heart-wrenching experience to you, that you were broken, that you were crushed. But then you decided to forgive that person. You decided to let go of the pains, the struggles. How does it feel to forgive? Those two moments in your life. Whether you like it or not, whether you are aware and conscious about it, you are never the same. You are not the same person from that time for who you are now. But those moments, moments of brokenness, moments of strength, hopefully the inner force, the inner power, the source of blessings, the grace of God, the hands of God was with you. Either challenging you to go beyond yourself or inviting you to be His presence, even to sinful person. You are products of your own personal journey and decisions. Okay? You may now come back. Hopefully you are not sleeping. That's why I made it sure that it's not that long, too long to feel too comfortable that you fall asleep, too short, not also to just simply pass through that experience. So, welcome to those who just arrived. I'm beginning to feel more nervous as these young people started to come and getting bigger. But anyway, so how was it? Hopefully, that short recollection will give us the context of our reflection this evening, because we will be reflecting about forgiveness and healing. But let me, because of my limited time, let me begin our reflection by simply putting description to these two keywords: forgiveness. When we talk about forgiveness, there will always be three different elements: the offended party, the perpetrator, and then the action. When we talk of healing, we are dealing with bringing back the balance. Okay? So, I will not jump right away into the theological discourse of these two keywords. What I would like to invite you is to look into this really from our human experience. You know, no saint has ever become without becoming first fully human. So I would like to bring down your feet into our humanity. And I will call this exercise or beginning of our reflection, let's begin the talk of forgiveness and healing from the point of view of what I will call anthropological forgiveness, or the anthropology of forgiveness. Yeah, I don't know if you have heard of Paul Ricoeur, a French philosopher, because I think he will help us understand the anthropology of forgiveness, how it is in terms of our human experience. And how are we going to understand that dynamics? Because each one of us, okay, is a process. We are in the making of something. But let me go directly each one of us is a convergence of the two forces, both outside us and inside us. Paul would call this the propensity of evil, at the same time, the predisposition of good. In other words, these two forces are in us. So when we talk of forgiveness, let's not just jump about us giving forgiveness to others. We also have to acknowledge that at one point in our life, we also becomes the perpetuator. In one way or another, we have hurt others as we are being hurt by the action of others. So, the geography of self-understanding is very crucial when we talk about forgiveness. The first question actually with forgiveness is forgiveness possible? Humanly speaking. And if it's possible, we always think of, so, if I'm going to forgive, what are the requirements before I will do it? Or before I can forgive someone? Culture, as being practiced by many of us, we would say, it's easy to forgive with someone as for apology. But then, if we look at it from our faith perspective, will apology a necessity in order to forgive? You know, all these human dynamics that we have to understand. So, each one of us is actually handling these two forces, the propensity of evil and the predisposition of good. Now, with these two forces, the challenge is which of the two we are going to make the most of it, the most influential, so that we can move on, we can act on something that is even beyond ourselves. Paul Ricoeur would present his idea that even the human frailty, even our weaknesses, can never prevent us from the predisposed good in us. In other words, we have to look at a human person that for one single action, he is not defined by it. In other words, when one committed mistake, that particular mistake should not define that person. Because that person is also in the process. And this, I think, will help us later on understand when we look at it from the theological point of view. And that each person also is capable of doing something beyond himself or herself. And this is, I would say, coming from the predisposed good in the person. And so what does it mean now for us? Okay? Because this is just a sweeping, a sweeping presentation of what he is saying of that self-knowledge, no? I think we also have really the challenge of the unexamined self. So we have to examine really who we are. And given that this reality now, we can look at some of the events in the sacred scriptures. For instance, I would start with our daily prayer, the Lord's Prayer. In the Lord's Prayer, it's very clear. Every time we pray, we say, "Forgive us as we forgive those who have sinned against us." That statement has a requirement that not only others have committed something, but we also are acknowledging our own limitations. But the beauty, when we look at the story of the prodigal son, even before the son asked for forgiveness from his father, the father made the decision to forgive. So what are now the implications of this? Among many, let me just identify one or two. First, when one forgives, it means one does not allow the limitations, the weaknesses of the perpetrator to define herself or himself. Okay? He was a father to a son, and he is not going to give up that fatherhood to a son simply because the son committed something. And it was not an ordinary thing for the son. You know, if you look at the context was when the son asked for all in inheritance, it was actually a declaration that his father is dead. It was not simply a claim of, "Give me my share." It was another way of declaring, "You are dead, that's why I have to get my inheritance." But even that action of the son did not allow the son to prevent the father to be the father to his son. And this is one of the elements when we talk about forgiveness. We do not allow and be determined by the failures, the wrongdoings of others to determine who we are. And this is the capability that is enshrined, innate to every person, all of us. You don't have to be a priest. You don't have even to be a Christian. It is enshrined in our humanity. The capability to let the good to roll in his life or in her life. So that is the first in the action of forgiveness. The second one, I already swiftly mentioned about it, but the second element is that we always can also decide to go for a higher value. Because forgiveness is not equivalent to justice. You know, justice can temper injustice. But will it change? If, for instance, if God's justice will only be applied to all of us, we will not pass. But the more challenging part is God's justice is mercy. And that is why forgiveness is available. And so, when God forgiven, for instance, the repentant thief, that encounter, Jesus was being himself to that man. And Jesus showed the ability that even in suffering, one has that inner power to do something even beyond the expectations of others or the situation. And I think this is one thing that we should discover in us when we talk about forgiveness. Because most often than not, the wrongdoings of the other becomes the basis of our actions only. But there is more. There is more to the wrongdoings of others, even if when we were hurt. Go back to who you are, to who we are. Because God has gifted us that innate power, not only to forgive, but to do something as an expression of love. Let me share with you the story, that Jesus mentioned about when you are going to offer something to the altar. And then you remember a brother has something against you. Go back, So, we are given some kind of guidelines how to be reconciled or how to forgive with each other. But there's another story when Jesus also instructed how to go about reconciliation. For instance, when someone have wronged you, talk to him privately and discuss things. If nothing happens, bring someone, because we also have people who can twist facts and figures, evidences. There are people who can also tell us lies, who can manipulate the whole stories. So it's better to have someone as a witness. And if it will not work, what did Jesus say? Bring that person to the church. And if it will not work, there's still another one. You have to declare that person what? An enemy. An outsider. But we should not end our story of how Jesus taught us about this portion. Because Jesus also said, what? His commandment.
Love your neighbor.
Love your neighbor. Love your enemy. In other words, he was saying, after you have done everything, and even human reason is not able to do it, there's another way. And that another way is loving the enemy. And so, forgiveness, while it does not always end in reconciliation, reconciliation and forgiveness are not two the same reality. One can forgive, but does not necessarily mean it will end up in reconciliation. Of course, we would want that everything would end up reconciliation. Because the idea really of reconciliation is like there's a broken jar, and when you reconcile, you put it back as if it is from its original form. But that's not the reality. When something is broken and when you put it back, there will still be cracks or whatever that because of the infraction, you cannot fully bring back everything it is from the original. But anyway, we will not go that far. We'll just limit ourselves to forgiveness. But the idea being is, when one forgives, we should not also forget that it is not only a human action. Forgiveness is also a God's action in human cooperation, because that very act itself is the moment of healing. In other words, when we are able to forgive, God is present in us. That by very act of forgiving, God is healing us through. And therefore, God is working through the victim. God is working to restore the lost dignity of the victim. And this is where I think we should always remember that the act of forgiveness is not just an expression of our human goodness. Before that human goodness becomes an experience of a wrongdoer, it is first of all an experience of the victim of God's grace. And that grace is first of all experienced in the healing of the person. Because that dynamics is actually the instrumentality of every person to bringing God's presence in one's action. That is why there's also an explanation that our action speaks so much of us. But more than from our faith perspective, our action is also a manifestation, a revelation of the God we believe. And this too becomes like the person who forgives is an embodiment of the presence of God. That is why forgiveness is an encounter not only of the broken, the victim, by the perpetrator, but it is also an encounter of God. And this is where conversion and transformation happens. So the healing begins when we decide. Because when we decide to forgive, we actually decided to allow God to be in us and with us. Let me share you a short story to end my sharing. A nun in a war-torn area. Sir Lucy, a nun from former Yugoslavia, who lost her brother in the war. She was raped by Serbian soldiers and later became pregnant. Yet as she came to the realization that the best she could do after the unspeakable evil forced upon her was to forgive. In her letter to her Mother Superior, which is an Italian newspaper published eventually, Sister Lucy wrote, "The Lord had admitted me into his mystery of shame. What is more for me, a religious? He has accorded me the privilege of being acquainted with the evil in the depths of its diabolical force. Despite the trauma, she kept her child like an ordinary mother, but with extraordinary love. As she explained in her letter, the child will be mine and no one else. Though I never asked for him, nor expected him, he has a right to my love as his mother. Someone has to begin to break the chain of hatred that has always destroyed our countries. And so I will teach my child only one thing: love. This child, born of violence, will be a witness along with me that the only greatness that gives honor to the human being is forgiveness. Thank you.
I'm going to have a few questions.
Sure.
If anyone wants to ask Father Matthew.
Now I will hide because you are going to ask question. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
We talked about forgiveness in general, but myself and I know a few people that, for example, in confession, they don't have a problem with forgiving others, but more it's about forgiveness for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
the sins that you've done. And I was just thinking, how can you be sure that, first of all, how can you, I guess, make sure that you know that you've forgiven yourself, in your heart? Because, sometimes you can just say, I forgive myself, but you still have that grudge or that feeling of maybe you didn't forgive yourself or
Mm-hmm.
others. So, how can you be sure, to forgive yourself, others?
I would put it this way. When there is already an epiphany of joy in your life, then that becomes an indicator that you have forgiven yourself. So, what I mean by epiphany of joy, it means, there's something that is now being given back to you that was lost when you know you are in sin. And that is why in confession, I would love always to begin also by telling the penitent, by simply acknowledging that you have committed something, it is already a grace from the Lord. Okay? Because it's easy to deny that we have done something wrong. But if you're able to do it, that's already a grace. That's already the beginning of the healing process. And therefore, as we move on, of course, telling in the confessional setting our shortcomings, I think the most important part here also is not just to see our sinfulness, but also to see how blessed you are, how blessed we are. So, I think we have to see ourselves in relation to the goodness of God. Because honestly, we are sometimes more cruel than God. We are sometimes more unforgiving than God. No? But, it's not what and how we would want ourselves suffer that will give appeasement to God. But I think if I have my own way of looking at God, God would be very happy when we have joy in our life. Going back to the anthropology of forgiveness earlier, because what I'm saying is, what you have done is not the defining moment of who you are. Okay? So you may have committed something. You may have done wrong. But that is not in a sentence construction. That's not a period. It's just a comma. And then the journey still go on. So when the journey goes on, then we are still in the process of, creating who we are. One thing that I love always to in a more poetic way is, each one of us is a masterpiece of God. And God continues to work on that masterpiece. We are not yet done. Done only when, but in as much as we are breathing, the master painter keeps doing, making that masterpiece. And so, I would say, to forgive oneself is not just to be just to yourself. Let us also be just to God. Because if we deny ourselves of forgiveness, we also are denying that God can forgive. And worst, we are replacing a forgiving God with an unforgiving human being. So I think it's also, perspective is very important when we look at the dynamics of forgiveness. But what I'm simply saying is, you have done something wrong, but that is not who you are. There's still a long way to make ourselves better. And so it's still part of that whole process. And if you find again joy, I think I am a believer that God will always be happy with us when we find joy and peace. That's why the sacrament of confession or reconciliation, it's a challenge always for us priests, that once a penitent goes out of that confessional box, there's something newness in the person. When, in a simple way of putting it, when someone get out of that box with a smile, because it means there is an experience of God's grace rather than the absence of God and maybe the angry priest. Anyway, I hope I answered your question. Going, gone? Yes, Michael.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. I was wondering if you could comment on the concept of guilt and the cliche of Catholic guilt. To what extent is it healthy to feel guilt before you fully reconcile with someone who's wrong?
To me, in a personal reflection and personal level, actually the feeling of guilt, it's actually the acknowledgement that is not who you are. When we do, I should, because like for instance, I can do something bad to someone. If I hurt someone, it's not just actually hurting someone. It is an act of betraying who am I. And that's where that guilt feeling comes in. Because you could have done this way, but you did. One, of course, there's that conscious awareness that you have done wrong and then you still did it. But I think the most fundamental to me is that self-consciousness or awareness of who am I. Like knowing that I an image of God, that me is a temple of the Holy Spirit. You know, all these things, when we try to figure out any wrongdoing or action, especially towards others, that becomes a betrayal, not only of the person, but of myself. That's why I'm able to do harm to another person. Because naturally, doing harm to another person is never natural. No? So it becomes that dynamics of the self. So, you know, you did something wrong for which you are not supposed to do. And that's the worst. And that's, I would put it, that's actually the consequence of sin. That even when no one knows about it, guilt is like a shadow that will follow us wherever we go. It's not what other people can see from our action. We know deep inside us if we are doing something wrong. And that part will haunt us up to the last moment of our life. So it's not a question whether others know about it or not. You know it by yourself. Or for married couple, I would always put it this way. You know, fidelity is important, but it's practiced when you are not around in each other's presence. And it does not matter whether other people know if you are married or not. You know yourself, even without your ring or whatever symbols. You know who you are. And so your action should correspond to your identity. Hopefully I'm able to hit and miss. Anyway. Okay, one last. Okay.
So there are many people who are hurt and need healing. What practical tips would you give for someone to start taking if they want to go through that process of healing?
Okay. Yeah, I think the first really is an honest acknowledgement that you are, for instance, hurt. You know, naming is very important, that we're able to name it. Because when we name it, it means it's in our consciousness, we are aware of it. And that by naming, being aware of it, then comes the next step. For instance, if somebody has done wrong to me, will I let that wrong action deter me from being who am I? No? So, if I would say no, then decision comes in. That I am also accountable for my own well-being. That is why forgiveness is a challenge when I would say, it does not require apology. It is an act that we do as justice to myself. So when I decide, it's not so much for someone who have committed wrong, but it is something that I am going to do for myself. Because sometimes, they don't even know that they have done wrong. And then you are suffering for something that they are not aware. But you are aware that you are going through it. You are suffering about it. And so that's the second step. It has to be a decision, not only to take care of yourself. I will put it more in our Christian witnessing, a moment of letting God to be the primary force in my life. Because that's what God commanded us. I seek mercy, not sacrifice. And so, it is an occasion, no? To give witness to our faith. Like Saint Francis would say, I remember one of our professor in philosophy. He would not allow us, because in the Philippines it's too warm, no? So we're perspiring. We're not allowed to use electric fan. We're not even allowed to fan ourselves. And he would say, no, that is an occasion to be in solidarity with the suffering humanity and with the crucified Christ. During those times, I could not really and fully understand what he was saying. But it's only later on, as you grow older, when you look back with your life, oh, yeah. The wisdom was there. But it was saying, each moment is not a problem that we have to solve. It can also be a potential to discover something. So, going through a pain, it's not just a pain. It can also be a potential to discover who am I. Why my reaction are like this? Because whether we like it or not, we are also sometimes victims of circumstances. Not only the perpetrator, there are many other times that even the victim and even the perpetrator also victim of a circumstance. So, the world is not just black and white. There's so many gray areas that we really have to pass through it and see the nitty-gritty, the details of what's going on. And of course, when you are able to figure it out, you are able to decide, then the thing is, there is greater than where I am now for life. And therefore, this is what Henry Nouwen would say, the wounded healer. That even our experiences, those that we don't want even to go back and to refresh, reset in our minds, these are also things that are actually forming us for a greater mission. So, as I said earlier, it's not a period, it's just a comma. We are all in this process. And healing is really an act for us to bring back that balance in our life. It's sometimes easy for physical healing, but emotional, psychological, those are more difficult. Mental health issue for us. So, but I think, how are we going to make the balance? I think that those are essential in the dynamics of healing and the forgiveness. But the point I would say, let's begin by acknowledging that in this journey of forgiveness and healing, we are not alone. Actually, this journey is a journey where we are with the Spirit of God trying to find the meaning of our existence and sharing that encounter as a moment of God experience also for others. And so that awareness of us in the journey, in the pilgrimage, I would always say, that pilgrimage is not to go somewhere else, but really to the heart of God. So whether we are in the occasion of forgiving or asking for forgiveness, whether we are in the process of healing and being healed, I think the point is on that journey should bring us to the heart of God. Because this is where we find the power of forgiveness, the power of healing. Okay?